What is the craziest story you have been dying to tell? Story 1. When I was 15 years old, I ran away from home because I was upset with my parents for a reason I cannot remember. I did not have much money, so I decided to hop onto the SkyTrain, the public transport train in British Columbia, and ride it as far as it would go. I reached the end of the line in less than an hour and decided I wanted to ride it all the way back again, while trying to formulate some kind of plan for how I wanted to live the rest of my life without my parents or anyone else. At the last stop, or the first stop, depending on your perspective, a girl came on and sat in the row right behind me. I did not pay much attention to her at first, as I was busy writing my life plan on a napkin. A few minutes later, she got up and sat next to me, curious about what I was writing. I told her the story, and after a few laughs, we began talking about everything and anything. Her name was Amanda, 17 years old, and absolutely wonderful. She told me she was getting off at the last stop, which was also the first stop, depending on how you looked at it. It was also the stop where I had gotten on originally, and I told her we would ride there together. The train ride took less than an hour, and what a wonderful hour it was. When the last stop did come, we both knew we probably would not see each other again, as this was before the days of cell phones, and I was a shy little kid afraid to make moves. As we reached the end of the sidewalk that split in two directions, she went right and I went left. Before saying goodbye, she turned to me and asked me a question that has stayed with me my whole life. She asked, "Tell me something you have done or want to do that you think I should do." It can be anything, as challenging as you want it to be, or as easy. As long as you give me the rest of my life to complete it, I promise I will do it. I was confused at first, but I thought about it and told her, "Sing a song a cappella in a room full of strangers." She said perfect, and then asked me if I wanted a challenge as well. I said I did, and she told me, "Read from start to finish Ulysses by James Joyce." I had never heard of it at the time, but I agreed, and we said our goodbyes. I have an awful memory and cannot remember most conversations I have with most people. But I remember all of that clearly. You know why? Because of the challenge she gave me. In the 12 years that have passed since, I have tried to read that book in over 150 different sittings. Every time I open my copy of the 780-page monster of a book, I always think of her, and I always think of that day. I have never been sure if it was her intent or not, but she left a lasting memory on me with that challenge. I soon realized what she had done was a completely wonderful and amazing thing for me, so I decided to keep it going. I have met a lot of strangers in my life, some who became friends and others who did not, due to living in different time zones and circumstances. I do not want to just have experiences and then let them go. I want to remember these meetings and embrace the fact that they happen. So whenever I leave someone who has had an amazing impact on my life, I add them to my Ulysses bucket list. I ask them to give me a challenge, as difficult or as easy as they want it to be, and regardless of whether they have done it or not, simply something their heart has wanted to do. Some have been easy and fun. I met a man in India 9 years ago who told me to, for a week or a month, cook or buy twice as much food as I intended to eat and give the other half to a stranger in need. I completed that mission 8 years ago and thought about that man and the time we had all the way through. I met a girl on a cruise 6 years ago who told me to jump into a body of water on a slightly cold day without checking the temperature first. I did that the same year. I met a couple at an outdoor music festival a few years ago who told me to wear the most bizarre outfit imaginable and walk through a public place, completely ignoring the fact that I did not look normal. I did that task the very next day at the same festival. Some have been difficult, to say the least. 3 guys I met in Amsterdam and stayed up all night with told me to go to a mall and give 10 strangers 10 presents. That one took a lot of courage, but I did it a year or so later. It was nerve-wracking but exhilarating to leave my comfort zone. A girl I met on a plane told me to skydive. I am still in the process of getting that done. A couple I met in California on the beach told me to tell the 5 people I hated the most that I loved and respected them. That one was very difficult because of my stubbornness, but I have come close to completing that list many times, still having 2 more people to go. Some things have had an everlasting impact on my daily life. I met a girl at a music festival who told me that whenever I get mad at someone, I should walk away, sing my happy song in my head for 5 minutes, then return with a calm heart and mind to work things out. I have made this my way of life. I once met a man at a hotel gym who told me, whenever your body and brain tell you that you are exhausted and done, use your heart instead and push out 2 more reps. I have made this my motto when working out or doing any kind of strenuous exercise. I also use it while working on anything, including studying. It is one of the best pieces of advice I have ever received. There are many others that have brought joy to my life. There are still many tasks I have yet to accomplish. And every time I think of them, I think of the people who gave them to me. It amazes me how well I remember all these people, while I cannot recall so many aspects of even yesterday. From these experiences, I not only take a mission or a challenge, but also a memory that never fails to appear in my mind. I opened my Ulysses book for probably the 300th time yesterday and read a few pages, which prompted me to share this story with you today. I am in the final 30 pages of the book, also known as the most dreaded part of the read, since in the last 40 pages, James Joyce does not use a single punctuation mark. No periods, no commas, no nothing, just a 50-page run-on sentence. I never saw Amanda after that day, nor do I know if she ever got the chance to sing a song in a room full of strangers. But what I do know is that she gave me a gift that has never stopped giving. Story 2. At my local video rental shop, there was a gumball machine with maybe 5 or 6 different colored gumball types. Taped to the glass gumball globe was a sign that read, "Guess the color that comes out of the gumball machine and win a free weekly rental voucher." 20 cents. With those odds, they were just asking to be exploited. So 12-year-old me devised a devious plan. I went to some shops across the road and traded $15 for a huge pile of 20-cent coins. That was about 75 20-cent pieces. When the employee saw me scuffling into the store with my shirt filled with coins, she was clearly upset. This was probably because she now had to count and check 75 guesses. I have no idea why she did not just kick me out then and there. In short, the next 20 minutes consisted of the shop employee watching me individually slot each coin into the machine. She had a pile of vouchers in hand, dishing one out onto the rapidly growing pile every few guesses. I was polite about it, pausing if another customer was there, but she breathed a sigh of relief when I put the 75th gumball in my backpack. In total, I pocketed 18 vouchers, a $126 total value, for $15. I took my stack of vouchers, shoved them in my pocket, and with my candy-filled backpack, I ran home. I will never forget the sound of 75 gumballs shaking around on my back. It was the sound of an afternoon of accomplishment. Story 3. I was in middle school in the early 1990s, round the time when Sam's Clubs and similar stores started opening up. None of us could drive yet since we were about 14, and few of our parents had club memberships, so it was rare that anyone could go there and buy things. We did not have jobs either, so our budget was basically about $5 in allowance here and there. One kid had a great idea and bought one of those huge bags of blow pops for $5. He walked away with about 100 blow pops, 5 cents apiece. He came to school and sold them for a quarter and was out of stock within a few days. He did this for probably 3 weeks before others got in on the game. There were a bunch of arguments over whether the others had to go into a different line of candy or if blow pops were fair game. The first wave decided that everyone needed their own type of candy, creating a little cartel. It is kind of funny in retrospect. About a month later, a new kid started selling, and he had everything. He must have spent $50 or maybe $100, but he quickly ran into a problem. The school started cracking down on student-run candy sales in the cafeteria, so lunchtime, which was where the money was, became a dangerous time to sell. Most of the kids stopped, cashing out while they could. But this one kid had way too much candy to just stop. There were only 4 classes after lunch, and you really were not selling candy during the first 2 periods, so that left about 5 or 6 reasonably good times to find customers. The bad news was that typically, you had the same kids in all of your classes by then, since we were broken up into levels. The exceptions, like gym and band, were really bad times to sell candy. The good news was that homeroom was between 2nd and 3rd period, and that group was different. You got to see kids you normally would not see, and more importantly, they got to see you. The kid with all the candy ended up repackaging it into Ziploc bags of 5 pieces and sold them to kids for $1 each. That worked for a few days until one of the kids in his homeroom asked to buy 5 bags, explaining that he was reselling the candy for 25 cents a piece and effectively getting a free piece of candy each day. There were a few kids in his next period class who wanted to do the same. He offered $4 because he wanted to make a profit, and the candy kid agreed. Not only did he sell out by the end of the week, but he bought another $50 worth of candy to do it again the next week. A few other kids in homeroom caught on and wanted in. Candy Kid ended up selling 5 bags at a time to about 5 or 10 kids, each seeing the chance to make a free dollar a day just by being middlemen. It was an easy sale. You would tell your friends how you bought the candy, sold it quickly, and show off the wad of singles you made. It worked for 2 or 3 days. Basically, the entire grade got flooded with candy sellers, and the candy was no longer scarce because the supply was not controlled by one person or a cartel. It became a commodity. Prices crashed to about 10 cents per piece, and the whole multi-level distribution system collapsed. The supply dried up quickly, and with teachers starting to crack down, no one tried again for months. Story 4. I was walking down the street once with a backpack on my shoulder, heading to school. I had work after school that day, so I carried some extra clothes and the 2 sticks of deodorant I always kept with me. I had about $300 in my wallet and was only $150 away from buying a new flat-screen television. That is when I saw him, a homeless man looking down on his luck, sitting next to a really sick-looking dog. No sign, no money cup, just a man and his dog. I live in the city, so I had seen this before, but this one felt different. I walked up to him and asked, "What is wrong?" He said, "I don't have enough money to get help for my dog." I tried to sell a necklace that I had, but they only gave me $50 for it. After talking to him for a minute, I told him, "I believe you, man. What's your name?" He told me his name was Rob, and I told him mine. I said, "Well, Rob, I like you. I am going to give you $250, a stick of deodorant, and some help. My friend works at the gas station just down the street, the Marathon. He has a guest room and can probably get you a job. You down?" I called my buddy Derek and asked if he had room in his place for someone to get back on their feet and if there were any job openings at the station. Sure enough, the answers were yes and possibly. I explained the situation and Derek approved, even saying he could talk his boss into giving Rob a job interview. I gave the money to Rob so he could get help for his dog, gave him my phone number, and told him Derek would be taking off work to pick him up soon. I said, "Use the money to fix your dog, and whatever is left is yours, but I am trusting you to use it wisely. My friend is going to get you a job and give you a room, but only until you can afford a place of your own." The man hugged me, crying, saying, thank you, I promise I'll do right by you," and things like that. A few days later, Derek and I took Rob shopping for new clothes for his interview. His dog was at the vet for a digestive problem from eating trash. Rob was settled into Derek's house, and everything was going well. I checked in on them now and then. A few months later, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not answer. Then it hit me. "Rob!" I answered quickly, nearly dropping my phone, and heard his unmistakable voice. After a bit of conversation, I found out that he got the job, bought a phone, and was renting an apartment. I went to see him, and it was not a bad place at all. He said his next step was to quit smoking. To this day, only a few months later, I still talk to him on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. Story 5. My friend, who I will call Stan, and I were driving around one night, which happened to also be prom night. He got pulled over for speeding for about the 3rd time that month, so he was in real trouble if he got a ticket. The officer came to the car and asked for license, registration, and proof of insurance. All Stan had was his license, and the glove box was full of firecrackers, so if he opened it, we were done for. He was trying to make up some excuse to the officer about why he did not have his registration, when suddenly the officer asked him, "Are you headed to prom?" Stan replied that yes, of course we were. The officer then asked, "Oh yeah? Well, then where's your date?" At that point, Stan reached over, patted my thigh, and said lovingly, "This man right here is my date." The officer got this dreamy look in his eyes and said, "You know what? I'm going to let you boys go. You have a great night at prom. I never got to go to mine." And he walked back to his cruiser and drove away. Story 6. The real reason my immediate family skipped my wedding reception. The night before my wedding, I was 25, and driving to the house my family had rented to hang out with just my brother, who was 20, and my best man, my father, who was 54, and my uncle, my father's brother, who was 52. All of us were very close and had never had problems before. Also of note, my brother had extensive mixed martial arts experience and was underage. I expected it to be relaxed, just drinking, telling stories, and general conversation. When I arrived about an hour late, they were already completely drunk. My uncle was the farthest gone. He kept walking into the neighbor's yard, trying to fight the man who lived there. He would wander over, shout obscenities, and I would escort him back, while my brother and dad encouraged him. At one point, I was distracted too long, and he disappeared. I went to the house to see if he was there, and my dad and brother followed me. The owner came out again, obviously upset, and I talked him down. But my dad overheard the owner call my uncle an out-of-control jackass. Dad took a swing at him and missed because my brother decked him. My brother did this because he was terrified the police would come and arrest him for being underage. Again, he was heavily drunk. They ended up in a full-on brawl in the middle of the street. My brother choked out my dad completely in a matter of seconds, and then walked around like he had just won a world championship. During this, I begged the owner not to call the police. When I saw what happened to my dad, I ran over to him, only to be pushed away. He got up and went back to the house, furious. I returned to the owner, thanked him for his discretion, and gave him my number to call if anything else happened. I went back to the house to get my car keys to start searching for my uncle. But now my dad was gone. I asked my brother where he went, and he replied, "Bastard took the last of the jack and left." Don't care, great. So now both my father and uncle were missing. I got in my car and headed to the police station to see if either had been picked up. On the way, I got a call from my dad's phone, but when I answered, a military policeman spoke. He asked if I was his son, and I said yes. He told me he had caught my father climbing the wall of the military base, and that I needed to pick him up. When I got there, 6 Navy military police were around him, and he had handcuffs on. They took the cuffs off, and he thanked each and every one of them for their service to our fine country, and they let us go. He did not talk to me the whole way home. Finally, 2 hours later, the neighbor called, telling me that my uncle was back, passed out in his yard. He said my uncle had unlatched the gate, tried to flip them off, and then passed out. No idea where he had been before that, and my uncle did not remember. Everything wrapped up around 5 in the morning. I got married the next day at 2 in the afternoon. I got 2 hours of sleep, but no hangover since I had not been drinking. My family was so embarrassed and angry with each other that they stayed for the ceremony only. My wife and I told everyone they had food poisoning from a restaurant, and it messed up the schedule of events. There was no best man, no mother-groom dance, and 2 empty tables. I was sworn to secrecy, so now I am telling strangers on the internet. Story 7. I had a crush on a girl I worked with, who at the time lived with her boyfriend of 6 years. She and I were at a work party one night, and the topic of tattoos came up. I have 7 tattoos, all hidden if I wear shorts and a t-shirt, most on my ribs, back, and so on. She wanted to hear more about them, so I explained each one. Then I jokingly told her that as a bet in college, I got a tattoo in a private place. She was intrigued and asked me what the tattoo was of. I played it off, saying it was nothing, but she kept pressing. I made up a story on the spot, saying that because I lost the bet, my roommates picked 10 random words from the dictionary, and I had those 10 words tattooed in that spot. She looked horrified, so I quickly tried to recover with a bad joke, telling her, "So maybe later tonight we can go upstairs and I can put some words in your mouth." She was completely mortified, stammered that she had a boyfriend, and the conversation ended awkwardly. 2 weeks later, she broke up with him, and now, 4 years later, she and I are married. So in the end, I guess my awkward attempt worked. Story 8. My married 80-year-old grandmother, who is overweight, tries to catfish men online for fake online gambling money in games where it is all virtual currency with no actual cash involved. She thinks no one knows. She has a profile picture of a young woman in her 20s, and she gets phone calls from a few men she's trying to draw in. She sneaks off so her conversations are private, saying they are just friends, and gets defensive about it. However, she is not very good with technology. At one point, she got a new laptop, and a family member was helping her set it up. She had a messaging service open in the background, and one of her online friends messaged her. Apparently, she hit something by accident and turned on the webcam. She did not realize what happened, but the relative did and quickly covered the webcam because none of us wanted to get involved in her drama. But not before her online friends started sending messages asking what had just appeared on his screen and what was going on. We never found out exactly how she explained it, but we believe she lied or covered up the situation somehow. Story 9. This is my father's story. In 1975, he was 18 years old. The Lao monarchy had fallen and communism had taken over. My family, along with almost every Hmong person, had allied themselves with the Royal Lao Army and the American CIA. When the Kingdom of Laos fell, the new communist government announced that they would exterminate the Hmong people to the last root. Because my grandfather was a ranked official under General Vang Pao, the Hmong leader, he feared for his family's life. When evacuation took place in mid-May 1975, my grandparents and their 11 children were not allowed to board the planes, as all the aircraft were already full. They were told more planes would come, but none returned. So my grandfather decided that the only way to save his family was to travel by foot into Thailand. While traveling through the jungles of Laos, my family was with other groups of Hmong people. One family in the group had 3 children no older than 2 years old. Halfway through the trek, the father of that family asked my dad if he could help carry his son, who barely knew how to crawl. My dad agreed, but my grandfather told him that if the baby cried or if soldiers were seen, my dad would no longer carry the baby, meaning his life would come first. The man agreed, as it was a desperate time. As they traveled, they came across communist soldiers. Shots were fired and everyone ran. My dad remembers the father of the baby being shot dead and another child, about 10 or 11, dying in front of him. My dad kept running with the baby in his arms. After a while, he was completely separated from his family. Alone with the baby, he continued through the jungle toward Thailand, sobbing, thinking his family was dead. After a few days, he stumbled across a herd of 4 elephants making loud trumpet sounds. He saw one elephant had died, its front leg destroyed, most likely by a mine. The baby was hungry and crying. My father gave the baby water and whatever he could find on the jungle floor. His worst fear was realized when 3 communist soldiers appeared. They heard the baby and ran toward him. My dad hid the baby under a bush and left, but he could not forgive himself and returned. He was caught by the soldiers, who had him on his knees and told him they were going to kill him and the child. He pleaded with them in Lao. Luckily, he was carrying my grandparents' silver and bargained with it, and they let him go. Once at the Thai-Lao border, he had to cross the Mekong River. The current was fast and the water was murky. He could not swim with the baby, so he decided to build a makeshift raft. As he searched for supplies, he came upon a mass grave of 20 to 30 dead Hmong people. Panicking, he went further south, but soldiers appeared again. With no choice, he jumped into the river with the baby. As he struggled in the current, the soldiers opened fire. The strong current carried him further away, and he finally reached Thailand. When he got there, the baby was not breathing. My dad tried desperately to revive him, and finally, after smacking him on the back, the baby coughed and came back to life. They walked on and arrived at a refugee camp. My dad could not find his parents or siblings, and he cried, thinking they were dead. Luckily, he found his uncle, my grandfather's younger cousin, at the camp. He gave the baby to his aunt to feed, since she had an infant of her own. 2 weeks later, my grandparents arrived at the same camp. My dad had never been so happy to see them. He also learned that his 5-year-old brother had been shot and had died from his wounds. Fast forward to 2014, my father was 57 years old with 4 kids of his own, and a baby boy due that month on the 19th. The baby he carried across into Thailand was adopted by his uncle and aunt. I now call him Uncle Johnny. Uncle Johnny got married and now has 3 children of his own. Storytime. One night when I was 17 years old, I was crashing on the couch at my friend's brother's apartment, which was on the 4th floor of a 5-story building his parents owned. They had both gone to bed, but I often have trouble sleeping, so I was still wide awake. I lay on the couch, my back propped up by the armrest, looking out the window while listening to music through my headphones. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning, So the street in front of their building was almost empty, even though during the day it was always busy. Occasionally a car would pass or someone would wait for or get off the bus, which ran all night. I closed my eyes for a few minutes, hoping I could fall asleep, but I could not. When I opened them again and looked toward the street, I saw two men. One was behind the other, with his arm wrapped tightly around his neck. His other hand was doing something behind the man that I could not see. They were shuffling a bit, and the man behind had his head resting on the other's shoulder, his face near the man's ear, as if whispering something. At first I thought they were a couple embracing while waiting for the bus, but then it hit me. The guy was being robbed at knife point. Almost immediately after I realized it, the mugger shoved the victim out into the street and ran, turning the corner out of sight. The victim stumbled, but luckily did not get hit by a car. I watched as he stood up, pacing nervously, clearly shaken. Then another man appeared from around the corner and walked up to him. I could tell he was asking what happened, and the victim pointed in the direction where the mugger had gone. The man pulled out a cell phone and then ran in that direction, with the victim slowly following. I figured he must have passed the mugger earlier and found it suspicious that he was running, so he wanted to check things out. He was a big guy and looked like he could have been gang-affiliated, but I will never know if they caught the mugger or not. It was the first time I had ever seen anything like that, and it felt surreal because no one knew I was watching from 30 feet above through the window. Story 11. Back in middle school, I had the reputation of being one of the best artists around, at least by the school's standards. I was also fairly popular, so a lot of kids trusted me with their secrets. One day I was talking with my friend, who I will call John, and as we were guys, the conversation turned to girls. I mentioned I had a girlfriend, but John went on about having a crush. After I asked him repeatedly, he finally told me it was a girl named Mary. Normally the conversation would have ended there, but he went on for half an hour about how deeply in love he was with her, how he thought about her constantly, how he needed her to get through the day, and more dramatic things. It was clear that John was a bit obsessively infatuated with her. A few days later, John came up to me with a request. He wanted me to draw a portrait of Mary. Before I could object, he handed me a crumpled photo of her from his pocket and walked off. I wondered why he needed a drawing when he already had a photo, but I agreed and started working on it after school. I spent hours on it, even hiding it from my mother so she would not ask questions. Eventually I finished, and for me, it was a masterpiece. The next day I showed John, and he exclaimed, "It's so gorgeous!" Nervously, I handed it over and left quickly, planning not to take requests from him for a while. John was thrilled with the sketch and started showing it to people, proudly telling everyone I was the artist. Eventually, a random kid grabbed the sketch and ran across the room with it. Who did he show it to? Of course, Mary. He excitedly explained how skillfully I had drawn her. I saw John sink into his seat, embarrassed, while Mary stared at the drawing in bewilderment. I could see she was about to say something, but I shook my head, silently trying to deny whatever the kid had just told her. I panicked. In my mind, the only logical thing to do was get rid of the sketch completely so no one else could see it. So I walked up to Mary, snatched the drawing back, and did the only thing that made sense in my panic. I ate it right there in front of everyone. It took a while, but soon there was no drawing left to look at. I thought it was worth it. Story 12. My pregnant and overdue wife was having strong contractions, so we dropped off our 3-year-old daughter at the babysitter's house on our way to the hospital. We met our midwife there, and after an exam, she told us my wife was not quite ready to deliver. She advised my wife to head home, take a warm bath, and call her in the morning. It did not look like it was going to happen that night. We thought, damn it, false alarm. So we decided to pick up our daughter from the babysitters on our way home. I put our daughter to bed, and my wife poured a bath. She wanted privacy, so I sat in the living room down the hall. Her groans were getting stronger. I had bookmarked a website about how to deliver a baby at home, just in case, since my wife was already a week overdue. So I grabbed the laptop for a refresher. When my wife finished her bath, I handed her a towel, and suddenly her water broke all over the bathroom floor. She groaned and said she felt like she had to push. I was on my knees with a towel cleaning when I looked up and saw the wrinkled head of my daughter. My wife asked, "Am I crowning?" And I nervously replied, "Oh, no, not at all. Maybe you should go lay down. I'll be there in a minute." I quickly called our midwife and told her to come right away. I grabbed towels from the closet and ran to our bedroom. She was already pushing, so I laid out the towels, held her hand, and told her we could do this. After about 5 pushes, my daughter's head began to appear. After adjusting her shoulder so my wife would not tear, the baby slid into my arms. With the umbilical cord still attached, I placed her on her mother's chest and covered them with the remaining clean towels. A few minutes later, our midwife arrived and I got to cut the umbilical cord right there in our bedroom. We filled out paperwork, weighed our daughter, and the midwife gave us some pointers before leaving for the night. Everything worked out. My daughter is now 2.5 years old, perfectly healthy and beautiful. Story 13. I grew up in a war zone, only a few miles from the front lines. After the war ended and the area was recaptured, those of us who stayed went through a rough time. There was hatred in people's eyes as I walked down the street. Prices skyrocketed as the economy tried to recover. I was in high school, where classes were separated according to ethnicity, 2 schools running in parallel under one roof. I had always been artistic, an introvert who never felt like I belonged. When I transferred to this school, I kept to myself while my sister quickly made friends. In the afternoon shift, it would already be dark by the time we got home. After an hour on the bus, we still had a half-hour walk. There were few streetlights, just an occasional house with a lamp on. Stray dogs sometimes cornered you, barking madly. A monthly bus pass cost a fortune, especially for families with more than one child. Some kids had to drop out because their parents could not afford it. It was another silent way of saying, "You are not wanted here." At the start of each month, there was a short grace period for renewing passes. That day, my sister and I were given money for a single ticket each, just in case. The driver let us board in the morning, but at night, when I got on alone, he scoffed at my expired pass. I frantically looked for my sister in the back of the bus, but she was not there. She had gone with a friend's family, as I later learned. The driver demanded that I pay. My wallet was empty. He started shouting at me, berating me as the whole bus sat silently watching. Their eyes seemed to say, "This is not my problem." Inside, I was panicking. There were no cell phones then, no way to call for help. My father was away, my mother at home with no transport. It was too far to walk safely in the dark. The realization hit me. I was stuck. Something inside me broke. All the pain I had endured over the years, all the humiliation and misery, came crashing down. It was not just the driver yelling, it was every moment that had led me there. I broke down crying, not just tears, but uncontrollable sobbing. I felt the weight of everyone's stares. I wanted to stop, but I could not. It was like trying to stop an avalanche. Then a young woman walked from the back of the bus and paid my fare. She was our new literature teacher, an eccentric woman with short blonde hair and a colorful backpack. I probably sobbed a thank you as I collapsed into a seat, still crying uncontrollably until the end of the ride. On the walk home, I kept breaking down again and again. Somehow, I managed to pull myself together before I rang the doorbell, but I fell apart as soon as my mother asked what was wrong. I sank into depression for a month. I barely ate, losing weight, curling into dark thoughts. What pulled me out eventually were charcoal drawings, stark contrasts of blinding light against deep darkness. They were the only expression I had left. Years later, I moved far away to a city. One morning I picked up a newspaper, and my old teacher's name caught my eye. She had won $1 million on a television show. I watched it in tears, recognizing her instantly. All I could think was, if anyone deserved such fortune, it was her. Story 14. When I was in the Air Force, all the airmen would prank each other whenever we could. One time, my friend Brent found a gigantic snail. This thing was almost the size of a racquetball. He thought it would be hilarious to stuff it down the back of my shirt and crush it, which he did. What many people do not realize is that inside a snail's shell is a lot of watery slime, in addition to its insides. The result of it being smashed under my shirt was slime running down my back and into my clothes. The sensation was awful, and everyone was howling with laughter. I promised myself I would get revenge on Brent that same day. I knew of a rotting tree stump that was home to countless wood ants. Quietly, I took Brent's uniform coat from his locker and brought it to the stump. A few kicks to the stump brought out a swarm of angry ants, covering the bark until it was barely visible. I carefully draped his coat over the stump and waited for the ants to crawl into every pocket and seam. I even scooped piles of them into his pockets with a cup. Once the coat was infested, I placed it neatly back into his locker. At lunchtime, Brent grabbed his coat as usual and headed for the mess hall. Before long, the ants began to bite. At first, he brushed his sleeves, thinking it was nothing. But soon he realized he was covered. In panic, he tore off his coat, buttons flying across the lawn, and ran to the gate guards for help. Story 15. One day, about 5 years ago on the day before Christmas, I called my buddy to meet me at the mall for some last-minute shopping. I got there before him and was playing Tetris on my phone when I noticed an older man in an electric wheelchair rolling around the entrance. He seemed to be asking people for help, but no one was stopping. I assumed he wanted change, but when he approached me, he said, "Hey buddy, could you help me out with something?" I agreed, and he explained that he needed to take his medication right away, but could not use his arms. This was unexpected, but I said yes. He asked me to unzip his backpack and get the pill bottle, which I found after digging through. Then he asked for his water bottle. He seemed embarrassed, but I tried to make him comfortable. He told me he needed 2 pills and asked me to place one between his lips. I carefully did so, then twisted off the water bottle cap and helped him wash it down. I repeated the process for the second pill. A few onlookers watched, probably realizing I did not know this man, but I ignored them. When I finished, he looked me in the eye and said with total sincerity, "Thank you." Then he rolled away. I was humbled and shaken by the experience. It reminded me not to take simple things for granted, and I will always remember that thank you. Story 16. A few months ago, my 72-year-old grandfather came home from a long day at work. We keep telling him to retire, but he loves working. He expected a hot meal from my grandmother and some rest, but instead he found several of his adult children and their spouses trying to console my hysterical grandmother. The moment she saw him, she began shouting obscenities, accusing him of being unfaithful, despite having turned his life around decades ago. Back then, he had been an alcoholic and had cheated on her, but after finding faith, moving to the United States and getting sober, he had been a devoted husband. My grandfather was confused until my uncle handed him a document. It was a child support order for a baby in Los Angeles. My grandparents lived in Bakersfield, but my grandfather often traveled to Los Angeles for shopping and visits. He insisted the order was wrong and swore he had not cheated. My grandmother refused to believe him and even began throwing shoes at him. Dodging them, he suddenly realized the mistake. His oldest grandson, named after him, lived in Las Vegas and had a troubled marriage. My grandfather ran inside and called his grandson. On the phone, he asked why he was receiving a child support order. His grandson confessed he had been having an affair in Los Angeles and had left the woman when she became pregnant. My grandfather passed the phone to my grandmother, who listened as her grandson explained. She quickly apologized to my grandfather, then turned her anger toward her grandson for hiding a great-grandchild from her. She did not care about his infidelity, since she disliked his wife anyway. No word yet on whether he has begun paying child support, but my grandparents are already planning to visit the baby. They love all their grandchildren and great-grandchildren equally, regardless of the circumstances. Story 17. Let me tell you the story of my first crush. Back in 6th grade at Catholic school, my class went on an outdoor education trip to a lake in the mountains. I was excited because the girl I liked was going to be in the same group as me for all the outings. We spent a lot of time together doing activities like hiking, arts and crafts, and learning about the ecosystem. I had a great time, but I never got the chance to talk to her one-on-one. On the third and final night, the group was supposed to go down to the cemetery to tell ghost stories. My crush twisted her ankle earlier that day while hiking, so she could not go. I volunteered to stay behind with her. After everyone else left, it was just the two of us sitting by the cabins, and we started talking. The problem was that after about 10 minutes, I ran out of things to say. We sat awkwardly for 15 minutes until everyone came back. It was the longest 15 minutes of my life, and after that, we never really talked again. Story 18. After being impatient in an under-18 eating disorder ward for 6 months, I became one of the oldest and more recovered patients. We still got new patients once or twice a month, and I made it my business to cheer them up. I built sofa forts, skateboarded in the corridors, set off streamers, and generally caused chaos. Around December, a new patient was admitted, very young and very confused about why she was there. Mealtimes were normally tense, but for her they were unbearable. She cried so hard it broke your heart. Nothing seemed to make it easier, and other patients began to complain that her crying was triggering. That made me angry, so I decided I would do anything to be her friend and make things better. I spent time with her during the day, persuaded others to join us in games and activities, and gradually she warmed up. Still, meals were awful for her. She would sit there in tears for hours, refusing to eat, while nurses grew frustrated. One weekend, I came back from leave with a secret weapon. I had smuggled in a pair of silly straw glasses. At dinner that night, I sat at my usual table and waved at my friend across the room. She managed a watery smile. Then I popped the glasses into my glass of calorie-heavy meal drink and started slurping, sending the thick brown liquids swirling around my eyes. Uproar followed. The girls at my table were in fits of laughter. Even the supervising nurse was laughing. And best of all, my friend across the room began to laugh too. The whole meal I played the fool, tossing peanuts into my mouth, making my sandwich talk, sticking straws on my head as antennas. By the end of it, she ate her meal. The next night she did too, and the night after that. For the first time, mealtime was bearable for her, and I will never forget the sound of her laughter that day. Story 19. About a month ago, on my way home from a friend's house, I saw an SUV with two men broken down in a dangerous spot by the highway. I stopped to help. They asked if I had jumper cables, but I had just cleaned my car and forgot to put them back. So I helped push the SUV to the side and offered them a ride. They were both kind, and it felt good to lend a hand. During the ride, we started talking. The younger man said he was new to the area and was the general manager of a nice hotel about to open. I mentioned that I worked as a night auditor at another nearby hotel. He gave me his card and said to reach out if I ever needed anything. At my hotel, management had been cutting hours while hiring new staff, and I was frustrated. So last Thursday, I sent him an email. 15 minutes later, he replied, asking for my resume. I sent it, and by 6 that evening, he called to thank me and asked if I could interview the next day. The interview went great. The hotel was beautiful, and he offered me more money than I was making after 4 years at my old job. Tomorrow, I find out my start date. Story 20. I was in my third year of high school and had gym for second period. I was usually first to arrive since my locker was close to the gym. When I walked in, I immediately thought, oh no, someone used the bathroom in here, because of the strong smell. Then I looked at the wall and saw a huge splash of feces, like someone had thrown it directly against the wall. There were two splashes, and below them was a crescent-shaped smear, basically forming a smiley face. On the rest of the walls were random smears and splashes. I bolted out of the change room, trying not to throw up the omelet I had eaten for breakfast, and ran to my gym teacher, Mr. A, in the staff room. I blurted out, "There's feces all over the change room." The teacher scolded me for my language, so I apologized and told them to see for themselves. When Mr. A and another teacher walked in, both started gagging immediately. That change room was closed for the rest of the day. Our class had to use the other gym's change room, which was already occupied by another group. The next day, strict new rules were enforced. The change rooms were locked after each use so no one could sneak in between classes. Whoever did it was never caught, but everyone suspected it was a student from the first period class. Story 21. In high school, I focused on academics to qualify for scholarships and did not care much about electives. I was randomly assigned to drama, even though I was an impassive person with a flat voice and little ability to express emotions. Fortunately, my teacher was experienced and taught me the technical side of theater. Our school had a state-of-the-art facility, advanced lighting, a powerful sound system, seating for about 5,000 people, and plenty of space for scenery. By my third year, I had become the head technician. When I returned for senior year, I found out my teacher had retired. She had been teaching for fun since her career had been as a stage actress. Control of the theater was handed to the school's coach, who was arrogant and, in my opinion, corrupt. He strutted in, barking orders as though he knew what he was talking about. Since I had been working with professional acting troupes that passed through, I knew how to run things properly, and I continued to do the job correctly instead of following his misguided instructions. He immediately stripped me of my responsibilities, which I accepted as the price of professional pride. He took my keys, yelled at me, and even threatened to prevent me from walking at graduation. My parents contacted their attorney, and the threat was dropped. but they never once asked me for the schematics and manuals for the equipment my former teacher had entrusted to me. So now, that $30 million facility sits in the hands of someone who has no idea how to operate it. Story 22. In ninth grade civics class, from January until June, we did an economic experiment. Every assignment earned money that was used to calculate our grade. The more money you had, the higher your grade. Harder assignments were worth more. For example, $100 for an essay versus $10 for a chapter review. Everyone also had to keep accurate accounting to simulate balancing a checkbook. In that class, there was a group of students who constantly picked on me. But when the project began, I gained a reputation as a good accountant. I handled my own books well, and soon classmates asked me for help. I started charging a small fee to manage their records. When those bullies asked for help, I charged them 50 to 75% of their earnings, since they did not understand math. Before long, nearly the whole class was giving me a percentage of their income while I managed their books. I stopped doing homework altogether because I had more than enough money. At the end of the semester, the teacher was shocked. Nearly half the class had C's or worse, and the bullies failed, despite doing large amounts of work. I ended up with more money than the entire class combined. The teacher was so stunned by the results that the program was discontinued after that year. Story 23. About 10 months ago, I was in a bad place. I had just gone through the horrible end of yet another friend zone situation, probably my sixth, and I decided to stop trying. I told myself that the next girl I met, I would only treat as a friend. For a couple of weeks, I stuck with my normal routine and circle of friends. Then I decided to branch out. I started chatting on Facebook with a girl from my class I barely knew, but she was cool and liked many of the things I did. Let's call her Rose. We began chatting almost all day, sending silly messages back and forth to entertain ourselves during the boring summer. Since we had never really spoken in person before, I made the worst decision of that summer. I invited her to a Hunter Hayes concert. For those who don't know, think of a country version of an early Justin Bieber. It was terrible, but we bonded over being the only two in our group who hated country pop music. I broke my promise to myself and asked her out. She kindly told me she was not ready for a relationship and would wait until college. For once, I was okay with it. I was just glad to have someone who shared my interests. We built our friendship, supported each other through struggles, vented to each other, and grew close. Occasionally, she reminded me she would be a terrible girlfriend, which stung, but I carried on. I just wanted her in my life, however that looked. One day, Rose was returning from a holiday in California and told me she wanted to see me right away. When we met, she showed me her photos, and suddenly she began to warm up to me. She tangled her legs with mine, held my hand, and even lay across me as we watched The Walking Dead. Then out of nowhere, she kissed me and said, "Congratulations, you're out of the friend zone. It only took you 8 months. How did it take this long?" She whispered, "You're a good guy, you know that?" And lay back down. Now I'm in a wonderful relationship with an amazing girl. She is artistic, beautiful, and faithful. She loves me no matter what foolish thing I do. Next year, I'm going to college with her, and we are being careful because we both know how important we are to each other. Story 24. I went on holiday to Wales with my grandma, sister, and mom. We rented a cottage in the Brecon Beacons. On the second to last day, I developed a severe stomach ache and gas. It wasn't the usual ache. It felt like explosive diarrhea was waiting to burst. I tried to hold it in, hoping it would pass. It didn't. As watery feces started leaking out, I rushed to the toilet. The moment I sat down, everything emptied in under 5 seconds. The relief was immense, but the smell was awful. When I went to flush, I saw the feces piled above the waterline. There was more waste than water. Flushing only raised the water to the top, mixing everything. Panicking, I called my mom for help. As she approached, she gagged from the smell. I explained, and she then called my grandma. My grandma came in and told me to grab a plastic bag. When I returned, I was horrified to see her elbow deep in the toilet, fishing out the solid parts. My mom stood behind her, crying with laughter and disgust. After that day, I could never see my grandma in the same way again. Not as the sweet old lady who baked cupcakes with me, but as the fearless woman who literally put her arm into a nightmare to save us from a plumbing disaster. Story 25. I had been waiting for a creepy thread to appear on AskReddit, but this will do. I was about 12 when it happened, on vacation with my family. It was one of the last trips before a disastrous outing to Canada that ended family vacations for years. Normally, we went to the same places, a small cabin we owned or another spot in the Upper Peninsula. So camping for a week in Ohio felt special. We had borrowed a pop-up camper. Usually being in such close quarters made us fight after only a few hours. But that trip we found a rhythm and were actually enjoying ourselves, sitting around the campgrounds talking and eating. The campground was small, and the only person near us was a man in a large tent next door. It rained on and off all week, so we stayed at the campsite most of the time. We made small talk with the man, and he said his wife was sick and resting in their tent. His tent was big enough for 5 or 6 people, but we never saw his wife. At the time, we did not think much of it. For meals, our family stuck to easy things, hot dogs and instant food. The strange part was the man's meals. Every evening, he cooked a mountain of hamburger patties. No buns, no sides, just piles of meat. And then he would carry them into his tent. He was a thin man, so we used to joke that his wife must be huge. Towards the end of the week, we packed up and went home. Later, it hit us. We had not seen his wife a single time. Sick or not, she would have needed to use the outhouse at least once. That realization gave us chills. We all wondered the same thing. Had he done something to her? The sheer amount of meat he cooked was insane, more than any one person should be eating. We never found out the truth, but even now we retell the story, and it still creeps us out. Story 26. 2 years ago, my parents decided it was time we visited the motherland, Somaliland. This was a place my dad would rave about constantly. How beautiful it was, how friendly the people were, how safe it felt compared to the South. My story is about the weirdest New Year's Day ever. We were staying in the town of Berbera, located right on the Gulf of Aden. After breakfast, we walked to the beach, which was a short distance from the hotel. After swimming, taking pictures, and bathing in the Gulf, my dad recalled that he knew of a fishing village further down the shoreline and suggested we check it out. Realizing there was not much to do at the hotel, we agreed and started walking. After about 30 minutes of walking and seeing nothing but more coastline ahead, we began to slow our pace. Thinking he was some kind of explorer, my dad took my little brother as his companion and went on ahead, telling the rest of us to stick with my mom and reassuring her that the camp was not far off and that if we simply continued following the shoreline, we would catch up. We soon lost sight of my little brother and dad. After 20 more minutes of walking, we stopped and waited for them to return. As we sat on the sand, a small boat appeared in the distance. I joked to my brother that the pirates had come to get us, but the boat kept coming closer, and the men aboard began signaling, almost as if to tell us not to move. At that point, we were alarmed, and to make matters worse, my dad was the only one who spoke Somali fluently. Realizing the potential danger, my mom told us to get up and walk back to the hotel, pretending we had not seen them. The men in the boat persisted and came closer until we could hear them shouting. We tried to ignore them until one man jumped out and began swimming toward us. Things were tense. My mom grabbed my arm and was about to tell me to run when I heard the man call my name, and then my brother's name, and then my mom's name. It turned out my dad had found the fishing camp and had sent the men to fetch us. After confirming they knew my dad, we jumped aboard and they escorted us to the camp. Riding on the waves with a couple of Somali fishermen, who we pretended were pirates, was amazing. The camp itself was simple, sleeping bags and stools around a fire. Reunited with my little brother and dad, the fishermen offered us tea and fish and shared stories about their work and how they lived. They were humble and hospitable. Time flew by, and as the sun set and darkness crept in, the fishermen offered to take us back by boat. But my mom was uneasy about getting back on the water. Luckily, the camp leader knew a man with a truck who could drive us back. We waited until it was pitch black and eventually a monstrous truck arrived. We all piled in the front, and generous as ever, the fishermen climbed into the back and rode with us. The 10-minute drive back to the hotel was over rough terrain, with no real road, and the ride was bumpy and loud, as the fishermen laughed and shouted at the driver to slow down, or they would fall off. We pulled up to the hotel with a huge truck and 15 men in the back. The guards drew their guns and things got tense for a moment until they recognized my dad and everything de-escalated. We reached the hotel safely, My dad paid the men, and we buzzed from the adventure for a long time afterward. Story 27. When I was about 10 years old, I got the go-ahead to move off the main floor of our walkout ranch and start living in the basement bedroom. The room had no windows, only a hallway door and a door that led to the shop, the power tool storage that opened to the backyard. I loved sleeping down there because it was cool and pitch black at night. After shutting the lights off, I learned to navigate in the dark, refined my sleep cycles, and trained my internal clock to need only 6 hours of sleep a night. I slept like a hibernating honey bear, except for one night. There was no context to the dream that snapped me awake. From nothingness to blackness, my eyes popped open and I immediately felt a presence. I knew I had to get out. Frantic, I tumbled off the bed and groped along the wall looking for a door or light switch, anything to break the seal of darkness. My hands slapped the painted walls like the sides of a smooth cave, and everything felt foreign. Where was the light? Was I even here? I tried to scream, but no words escaped, as if they were being pulled back inside. Flight instincts kicked in, and I clawed along the baseboard, away from the shop door, toward the hall. My head slammed into the wooden door, and pain was quickly overridden by hope when I spotted a sliver of dim light beneath the frame. My hand found the cool metal handle, and it turned slightly, but the latch held fast. I twisted the knob the other way, but the door would not budge. Panic crept down my spine as I stuck my right hand out as a shield toward the darkness. Something grabbed the tip of my pinky. I felt a sharp pull and thought it was over. A reflex made my hand snap back to the point of collision, grab hold and fling whatever had me in the other direction. I was blinded by white light and briefly thought heaven existed. Then the light faded and I was alone, sweating and naked in my room, with blood running down my chin. I do not know what happened that night. Logic tells me it was a night terror, but the story I tell people is that I was abducted and trying to escape from an alien ship after they put a microchip in my nostril. From time to time, it itches like crazy. At least that is the explanation I give people when they catch me picking my nose. Story 28. I had the awful responsibility of cleaning up the administrative mess of a high-rise condominium. Crime, mismanagement, and fights turned my home into a small war zone. People were desperate for leadership and turned to me. They heard I ran a company and had management experience, so I reluctantly volunteered to fix things. In some cases, I know it was my leadership that solved the problems. In others, I either had help in the background or got extremely lucky. One evening, I was sweeping up glass from a vandalized window when a young fellow walked in and asked what had happened. I was burned out, so I gave him a short version of my problems dealing with crime and losing the battle. He confessed that his two roommates had stolen a bench from the first floor, one used by elderly residents. They proudly displayed it on their balcony. Our confessor was planning to move out soon, and as long as we did not rat him out, he would let us into the apartment to recover missing furniture. We evicted the roommates, and no more furniture disappeared. Another time, there was a mean couple with a 30-year-old camper rotting in one of our parking spots. The rust left a thick coat around the vehicle and streaks running into the storm drains. They refused to dispose of it, and administratively, I could not do much. Arguments erupted daily, not only with the couple, but also with residents furious that nothing was being done. Weeks later, the camper was gone. Soon after, the couple came screaming into the office, demanding to know where it went. I had no idea. Hours later, they found it abandoned behind the church next door, completely torn apart. Someone had crowbarred it, ripped out all the doors and appliances, and left it undrivable. It was eventually towed away as scrap. After 8 months, the condo was running smoothly. Crime had diminished, residents were happier, and I brought in a better property manager. I gained a reputation for fixing big problems. 10 years later, I became president again to clean up new messes. The mean couple still thinks I had something to do with the destruction of their camper, and they talk badly about me behind my back. It does not matter. They know not to mess with me, or something else might get wrecked.